The phone call that would change Luther Vandross's entire perspective on music came on a cold January morning in 1989. His manager's voice carried that careful tone people use when they know you won't like what's coming next. Luther, we have an opportunity. Big charity benefit. They want you and Whitney Houston for a duet. The silence on the other end of that phone line lasted exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds where Luther Vandross, the man who'd sung for presidents, sold millions of records, and defined what it meant to have a smooth voice, felt his stomach drop. Before you hear what Luther said, you need to understand something about the music industry in 1989. This wasn't the age of auto-tune or studio magic that could fix every mistake. When you sang, you sang. Your voice was naked, exposed, honest. And Luther Vandross had spent 15 years making sure his voice was absolutely, unquestionably perfect. He wasn't just confident, he was the definition of male vocal excellence. That velvet voice that made women cry, and men wish they sounded like that. Those impossibly smooth runs that other singers would practice for months and still couldn't quite nail. 15 years of being untouchable. 15 years of being the standard. But beneath all that smoothness, beneath the sold-out concerts and the Grammy Awards and the platinum records, Luther carried something he never talked about publicly. A fear. A terror, actually. That one day someone would come along and expose him as less than perfect. That someone would make him look ordinary. And Whitney Houston? She was the voice that made other singers question their career choices. She was the woman who could hold a note so long that people forgot to breathe. She was 25 years old and already being called the greatest voice of her generation. She was everything Luther feared. "No," Luther said flatly. His manager paused. "Luther, it's for charity. I said no. Can I ask why?" Luther was quiet for a long moment. Then quietly, "She'll make me look ordinary." His manager had worked with Luther for 10 years. He'd never heard the kind of vulnerability in his voice before. "Luther, you're Luther Vandross. Nobody can—" "Her voice is too big," Luther interrupted. "Too powerful. She'll overpower everything. Everyone will be listening to her, and I'll just be there. Background noise in my own duet." The manager tried reasoning. "It's for children's cancer research. It's one song. It'll be great publicity." But Luther's answer stayed the same. No. Here's what nobody knew. Luther had been watching Whitney's rise with a mixture of admiration and dread. Every time she hit a note that seemed impossible, every time she made a song her own, Luther felt something shift inside him. Not jealousy exactly. Something deeper. The fear that his era was ending and hers was beginning. 3 weeks later, the charity organizers called again. They'd raised the stakes, a televised special, prime time, huge audience. And they'd gotten creative with the pressure. "Luther, Whitney specifically asked for you. She said she grew up listening to your voice. She said it would be an honor." That changed things. Not because Luther's ego was flattered, though it was, but because now refusing would look like fear. And Luther Vandross had built a career on looking fearless. "Fine," he said. "One song. Professional, clean, we get it done." When Luther arrived at the studio that February morning, he'd already decided how this would go. Keep it controlled. Keep Whitney in check. Don't let her overwhelming power turn this into the Whitney Show featuring Luther Vandross. He'd barely slept the night before, running through the song in his head, planning every breath, every note, every moment where he could anchor the performance and keep control. This was his session. He was the veteran. The studio was A&M Recording on La Brea, one of the best in Los Angeles. The kind of place where legends were made. Luther had recorded there dozens of times. He knew every microphone, every corner, every acoustic sweet spot. When he walked in at exactly 9 a.m., Luther Vandross was never late. He carried that energy with him. Cool, professional, distant. Whitney was already there, warming up in the corner. When she saw Luther, her entire face lit up like someone had just told her Christmas was coming early. "Luther! Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. I'm such a huge fan." She practically ran over, hand extended, wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt. No designer outfit, no entourage, just her. I had Never Too Much on repeat when I was 16. I learned every run, every breath. You were the voice to me. Luther shook her hand. Barely. His palm touched hers for maybe half a second before he pulled away. Yeah. Hey, let's start. Whitney's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, professional instinct kicking in. Of course. I'm just so excited to... The song? Luther cut her off, turning to the producer, not even looking at her anymore. The producer, Marcus, a veteran who'd worked with everyone from Quincy Jones to Babyface, glanced between them and cleared his throat. He'd seen tense sessions before, but this felt different. This felt personal. The producer, sensing the tension, quickly explained. Slow love ballad, classic duet structure. Luther takes the first verse, Whitney takes the second. They come together for the bridge and final chorus. Perfect for Luther's style, smooth, controlled, intimate. The kind of song he could do in his sleep. They started the first run-through. Luther sang his verse, flawless. That signature sound, every note perfectly placed, every run exactly where it should be. 20 years of mastery on display. Then Whitney's verse came, and Luther heard something that made his stomach drop, that made him stop tracking the music and actually listen. She was holding back. Luther had been in this business long enough to know the difference between someone who couldn't sing and someone who was choosing not to. Whitney Houston was choosing not to, not singing badly. Whitney Houston couldn't sing badly if she tried. That would be like asking the sun not to shine or asking water not to be wet. But she was deliberately making herself smaller, toning down the power that every music critic in America had been raving about for the past 3 years, smoothing out the edges that made her voice so distinctive, making her voice fit into the space around Luther's, instead of claiming her own space the way she had every right to do. She was matching him, carefully, respectfully, like she was trying not to break something fragile, like she was walking on eggshells around his ego. Luther felt something twist in his chest. It wasn't pride, it was shame, because he realized in that moment that Whitney had figured him out. She'd seen right through his coldness, his distance, his professional facade. She'd understood that he was intimidated, and instead of being offended by it, instead of proving him wrong, instead of showing him exactly what she could do, she was protecting him. They reached the duet section. Their voices came together, and Luther realized something that made him feel sick. She was protecting him. Stop! Luther raised his hand. Stop the music. The band cut off mid-note. Everyone looked confused. What's wrong? The engineer asked. Luther turned to Whitney, really looked at her for the first time since he'd arrived. You're not singing, he said. Whitney blinked. Yes, I am. No, you're not singing. You're matching me. You're making yourself smaller. Luther's voice was harder than he intended. Why? Whitney looked down. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. So quiet that the engineer had to adjust levels just to pick it up. Because you didn't want to do this. I heard about it. She looked up, and Luther saw something in her eyes that gutted him. Not anger, not resentment, but kindness. Pure, genuine kindness. You said no 3 times. Your manager had to convince you. I know. I know you think I'm going to make you look bad. Luther felt his face go hot. He wanted to deny it, to say she'd heard wrong, to deflect. But she kept going, her voice gentle. And that's okay. I understand. This business is hard. Everybody's always comparing, always ranking, always trying to figure out who's better. I didn't want to make this harder for you than it already was. I just wanted to make this easy. I wanted you to feel comfortable. The room went absolutely silent. Marcus, the producer, was staring at his shoes. The engineer had stopped adjusting his board. The session musicians, seasoned professionals who'd seen everything, were looking anywhere but at Luther, because everyone in that room now knew the truth. Luther Vandross, Mr. Smooth, Mr. Perfect, had been afraid of a 25-year-old woman. And that 25-year-old woman had responded to his fear, not with pride or anger, but with grace. Luther stood there, and in that moment, His entire self-image cracked open like an egg hitting concrete. This woman, this phenomenal, once-in-a-generation, God-given talent, had heard that he was intimidated by her. She'd heard that he'd refused to work with her multiple times. She'd walked into this studio knowing that the man she'd grown up admiring, the man whose vocal techniques she'd studied and copied, the man she'd called her hero, was scared of her. And instead of being offended, instead of using this opportunity to prove him wrong, instead of showing him up and showing the whole world what Luther Vandross really was, insecure, past his prime, intimidated by the new generation, she dimmed her light for him. Whitney! Luther's voice cracked like ice under weight. He had to stop, swallow, start again. Whitney, I'm an idiot. No, you're not. She started, but her eyes were already filling up. Yes, I am. Luther laughed, but it came out wrong, broken, damaged. I'm a complete idiot. I refused to sing with you. Not once, not twice, but 3 times because I was scared. No, not scared. Terrified. Absolutely terrified. He turned to face her fully now, and for the first time since he'd walked into that studio, he actually looked at her. Really looked. Saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the nervousness in how she was gripping her lyric sheet, the way she was standing like she was ready to bolt if he said one more cold thing to her. Terrified that you'd show the world I'm not as great as they think I am, that I'm not really Luther Vandross, the smoothest voice in R&B, that I'm just a man who got lucky and built a career on tricks and technique and being able to hit the same notes reliably every single time. Whitney started to protest, but Luther held up his hand. Let me finish. Please, I need to say this. He took a breath that shook. I've spent 15 years being Luther Vandross. Capital L, capital Phi. The smooth one, the perfect one, the one who never cracks, never misses, never shows weakness. And then you came along with this gift that's bigger than anything I've ever heard. This voice that sounds like God decided to sing through a human being. And I realized that no matter how smooth I am, no matter how many runs I can do, no matter how controlled my vibrato is, he paused, I might not be the best anymore. And that scared me so much that I tried to avoid you entirely, tried to pretend you didn't exist, tried to protect myself by keeping you away. The studio was so quiet you could hear the tape reels slowly turning in the machine. He paused, looking at her directly now. But Luther's voice broke completely. You just dimmed your light for me. Nobody's ever done that. Nobody's ever cared that much about protecting my ego. And that's the most generous thing anyone's ever done for me in this business. Whitney's eyes were filling with tears. Luther, you are great. I wasn't trying to. I know you weren't. That's what makes it even more incredible. Luther turned to the band. Let's do this again. But this time, he looked back at Whitney. Don't hold back. I want to hear the real you, the full power. I want to see what you can do. Whitney hesitated. You sure? I'm sure. Luther smiled, a real smile this time. Show me what I've been missing. The second take was completely different. Whitney unleashed. That voice, the one that had made Luther so afraid, came pouring out. Full power, no holding back. Runs that seemed to defy physics. Notes that rang like church bells. And something miraculous happened. Instead of being overshadowed, instead of sounding ordinary next to her, Luther rose to meet her. Not competing, complimenting. Her power pushed him to find power he didn't know he still had. Her passion reminded him why he'd fallen in love with singing in the first place. Her freedom gave him permission to be free too. They started playing off each other. She'd hit a high note, he'd answer with a smooth run. He'd hold a sustained note, she'd weave harmonies around it. Back and forth, building, climbing, each one making the other better. When they finished, the studio was silent for a solid 10 seconds. Then the engineer, a 30-year veteran who'd worked with everyone from Aretha to Stevie Wonder, said quietly, That's the best I've ever heard you, Luther. Luther looked at Whitney. She was glowing. That's because I finally had someone worth singing for, not against, Luther said. The song became a massive hit. When it was released 3 months later, it shot to #1. Radio stations played it constantly. The music video, Luther and Whitney in an elegant ballroom, singing to each other with genuine affection, became iconic. But more than that, it changed Luther. In interviews after, he'd say, "Working with Whitney taught me something I'd forgotten. Great singers don't compete. They elevate. She made me better just by being herself. And she did it while being kind enough to protect me when she didn't have to." At the Grammy Awards that year, someone asked Luther if he was worried about being shown up by female vocalists like Whitney and Mariah. Luther's answer was immediate. "Shown up? These women are the reason I still love singing. They remind me there's always another level, always something more to reach for. I used to see them as threats. Now I see them as inspiration." Years later, in 1994, Luther gave an interview that got very little attention at the time, but meant everything to the people who heard it. "I avoided Whitney because I was insecure," he said. "I was so afraid of not being the best that I was willing to turn down opportunities, avoid collaboration, isolate myself. Then she taught me something. The music is bigger than my ego, and when you sing with someone who makes you better, you're not losing anything. You're gaining everything." The interviewer asked what moment with Whitney stood out most. Luther didn't hesitate. "The moment she made herself smaller for me, the moment she dimmed her light to protect mine. That's when I realized what true greatness looks like. It's not about dominating, it's about lifting. She could have embarrassed me. She could have proved I was right to be intimidated. Instead, she showed me grace, and that grace changed how I see this whole business." When Whitney died in 2012, Luther Vandross had already been gone for 9 years, having passed away in 2005. But in his final years, he'd often tell young singers the same story. "I once refused to sing with the greatest voice of our generation because I was scared of not measuring up," he'd say. "And when I finally did sing with her, she taught me the most important lesson of my career. Your voice isn't a weapon to beat others with. It's a gift to share. And when you share it with someone equally gifted, you don't get diminished, you get multiplied."